My next question to the panel and to all of us to think about is, why is it important to look back to move forward?
I was really drawn to history before I realized that I was already a landscape architect. But I think that one of the interesting things today is just in the context of considering this particular history, you know, where my thinking has gone. I mean, I don't mean to be so self-referential, but I think I've thought of it more as a practicing landscape architect. I have found myself, for instance, wanting to know more about these clients. I mean, obviously they had the resources to, you know, they had money. They were able to do this, but setting that aside, it's interesting to think about what they were drawn to and what things they found and didn't find in the house. But I also think that you were talking a little bit ago about how things are different and they're the same, and I think that referring to history makes us remember the things that are the same. It's very hard for a landscape to be contemporary, so in that way, I think in certain ways I've always been freed of, I think one of the failings of landscape architecture in the 20th century was a desire to have that contemporary feel that architecture so easily had. Those landscapes look really funny to me looking back, as much as I loved them in the 20th
so glad you
century.
said that.
And I think that being a designer requires that we sort of understand how architecture or gardens or landscapes or furniture have passed through time. I mean, when you think of the food revolution, for example, I mean, people in this country, we sort of think, oh, well, you know, Julia Child started something and there was Alice Waters and we only have good food now. Well, that's crazy. I mean, people have had good food forever, and people have had comfortable furniture forever. And like I have a house, a summer house built 150 years ago, and it's very small, but just the genius of light on two sides of a room. I mean, so moving back and forward through time, I think, is a way of freeing yourself from too much preoccupation with things that are contemporary.
So, but I want to go to Andrew on this, because I always associate you with the sort of the future of the world and materials and Dr. Dent. so how about, what is it? How do you feel about this importance of looking back to look forward?
Was Wright someone who looked backwards?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Because from the way he talks, you almost think as though he doesn't. He's always believing that it's going to be a forward thinking. I think, well, we're not doing much today we haven't changed much in the way that we act and work and the sort of buildings that we live in. We haven't changed much over the last couple of centuries, have they? I mean, we're still living in the same sorts of shapes. They look slightly different. But I think there is, I think we need to understand that we're not actually that much different from his generation, from the previous generation. We still have the same needs, desires, wants. We still have the same desire to communicate, the same basic needs. So although the look of our spaces changes, the actual, our needs don't. We're still trying to create a space in which we feel comfortable, in which we feel connected, in which we can enjoy company.
But I think referencing the past in terms of ideas, concepts, and human interconnections, not in the postmodern way of taking this bit here, that bit there, and decorating the wall, and which was sort of a wrong way of understanding what history is. I think we're beginning to re-understand the historic connection. So Toshiko, I mean, this is really interesting because you work in these contexts a great deal. I mean, the Rudolph House, the Wright House, you're surrounded by history. And the way you interpret it, and this interpretation is one of Wright's principles, the way you interpret it is so inventive and so forward-looking and so modern. So can you talk a little bit about looking back to go forward?
I think history exists simultaneously with us. I'm just using word simultaneous as an important concept because around the beginning of century when houses like Maya May House was built, there are two other important discovery, Einstein's relativity and simultaneity, in which he does think that all the events are happening at the same time. It didn't stop. It's a continuum, time as continuum, which reflects a lot to Frank Lloyd Wright's principle. Also, another one is Freudian psychoanalysis, in which interior world of human being is externalized. So that particular manifestation, when you see Frank Lloyd Wright interiors, you really see the externalization of interior world of humans. So beginning of 20th century, we think history as something which simultaneously is a part of our life. We can't escape it. And without studying the history and how certain people at certain time juncture has perceived spaces and principles in what way, that really is a driver for thinking for us for now. Because without this particular, we are in the world of dummies and amnesia, which is a bit of a societal malaise right now. We cease to be intelligent and well-informed. I think history really gives us necessary acuity as human beings to move on with our life.
So, and that's the point here, is that I think we have created a society where we would rather be removed from each other than learn from each other and really be interested in one another. I mean, with all this twittering and tweeting and thumbing and all this junk that sort of puts us in touch, but really puts us out of touch in a deep way. So, I mean, this is really important for us to reconsider in a very, very important way, in a very sort of internal way. How do we understand that simultaneity?
It feels like this idea of moving forward in a way that's informed by the past may be increasingly important for us. And it just feels to me that you know, we talk a lot about efficiency within our industries and our businesses and our actions and so on, but the type of efficiency that we often talk about it's an artifice, it's an artificial efficiency that's based on a lot of aspects that appear to be not sustainable within the context of the planet. And so I find a huge amount of inspiration in looking back, because we were really clever as humans at living on the earth in ways that I think were much more efficient naturally. And, you know, I can cite, I bump into this all the time on my farm, where I realize that the way that I'm doing things, even though I've been in love with them my whole life, that actually the level of brute force and violence that I apply in, you know, tilling the soil and harvesting crops it's insane. And the things that I do with a lot of horsepower and diesel fuel could be much more effectively and efficiently done by animals. And I even look to, you know, I mean, it's a kind of a crude example, but I have an old manure spreader that was designed probably in the 1920s. And, you know, if we were to design something like that today, we would just take a hydraulic motor and we'd take a lot of horsepower and we'd put a shaft on it and we would make this thing work. But the mechanism on this manure spreader is as elegant as any escapement mechanism that you would find in a well-crafted clock. I mean, it's just brilliant.
It's almost like what you talk about is a symbol of a maturing society, that you, Bob, represent that to us?
I think it's important to note that it has not been without deep periods of depression.
Well, I think that's where we are now as a society.
This is what we're up against, right? Is that when you start to look at all these underpinnings, you know, in which you have believed fundamentally for so long, and you start to realize that actually there are flaws within them, and you have to figure out a new pathway forward, which has inherent in it risk and unsurety and, you know, the necessity to learn to do things in a fundamentally new way. It's daunting.
But Mr. Wright would have been extremely challenged.
He would have jumped right in, I think.